Hello, we have a guest today from OVR Technology. Aaron, you're the CEO of OVR Technology. And Johnny, I already got to experience this ahead of time. The OVR technology let me smell inside the VR headset. And I know most of people watching haven't experienced this before. So we are going to do some of the demo first. And we'll go through the introduction of OVR technology and ask some interesting questions. How are you doing today?
Good, good. It's a pleasure to meet both of you and get a chance to talk about our sense of smell and technology and how we're working together to pave the way for a new way to experience digital media. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
we have Johnny, the Strategic Innovation Director at Fresh Consulting. Johnny, are
Yes,
you
hello, hello.
excited to see the OVR
I'm a
model?
little jealous. So for those that are joining, Elisha and I are actually not in the same geographical location. He's in Seattle and I'm in Austin, Texas. And so I did not have a chance to experience the technology. But man, I've been seeing you guys in the news, Aaron, like all year. I've seen some really cool demos that have popped up on my YouTube feed. The algorithm knows that I'm interested in this kind of innovative stuff you guys are doing. So I'm super excited to hear more and dive a little deeper. You've covered a lot of what your company does and the kind of the innovative stuff you're doing with Scent. So yeah, I'm super excited, Elisha.
I'm Elisha, and Technical Innovation Director at Fresh, and we love doing these things where we get to try new technology and also ask deeper questions. Today's agenda, we are going to go through the demo, talking about how it works and visually so that people understand how this can be experienced in person. And we're going to go through some of the introduction about OVR and its technology. We'll ask Aaron some questions. And we get into some interesting explorations that we want to do, which I think is very rare in other interviews. I think we're probably unique in that. I think smell in the VR is such a new concept that not many people have experienced. And people might understand in their head what it might be, but we thought we'll do show and tell. This is a footage that I've recorded using the OVR headset. On top, you can see the headset that kind of looks like a Meta Quest 2 that people have probably seen in person. It's actually by Pico. And right under the device, you'll see the black device with the light around my nose. I would say heart of OVR technology that produces scent. And in the footage, you can see that I'm looking at the roses right in front of me inside the VR experience. So that's why it's the OVR, right? It's a VR and the scent device combined. As I immerse myself into the virtual world and look at the rose and get close to it, I can smell the rose. It's magic. And in my mind, I understood how it might work, but until you experience it, you never really understand the immersive experience that it will create for you. Johnny, what's your impression just by looking at it from a person who hasn't quite experienced yet?
For what it's providing, it's a very discreet device. And it does seem like there's been a lot of detail and intentionality around what the device looks like and how it fits onto headsets. I can see that this will fit on different headsets, right? If you did have the Meta Quest versus the Pico, or if you did have a whatever the headset might be, it's got a strap that fits and it gets away from the cameras and that kind of thing. But also, it's placed in a location where it's really close to your nose. That's pretty cool. And I can tell that it's not tethered, so it doesn't have a
Mhm.
cable to it. It's Bluetooth connection is what I found out from that. But it's just natural. I don't think it's adding a lot of weight or anything from that side of things. So you're just having your normal experiences, but then you're providing this new kind of layer, the layer of immersiveness. I think that's really fascinating. So yeah, discreet, easy to use. It looks really high end and
And I'm going to the first question, which is what is OVR? And from the website, what I got the gist of it is a scent technology for virtual reality. And the scent makes virtual experience more engaging, more immersive, more emotional, more effective. And we would like to hear from you what it means to be engaging, immersive, and how is it like more effective and emotional?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do this like a little bit out of order too, but since we just saw that demo, one of the things that isn't completely apparent from that demo that I think is one of the things that we're most proud of about what we've been able to engineer is what you were experiencing with spatial scent there. So for people watching it that are seeing flowers, they're seeing that campfire smoke and they think, okay, if that's what I'm seeing, then that's what I'm smelling. But actually, for the flowers, for example, you weren't able to smell the flower until you leaned over and got close to it, or you picked one up and brought it to your nose. So having that spatial quality has something that's never really been done before, and it makes it a lot more immersive, and it allows your brain to tie the smell to these virtual assets, which makes it a lot more realistic too. So I just thought it's cool to point that out as one of the primary features of our platform, is that it's spatial, it's wearable, and it's personal. Now, I can't wait to dive into those things, but I'd love to start and rewind a little bit and just talk about smell for a minute, like why smell? Because I think that most people are pretty familiar with their sense of smell when it comes to buying maybe a perfume or an air freshener, or when something is off in the fridge, or maybe even some folks are familiar with their sense of smell recently because of COVID. They may have lost their sense of smell. So there's this kind of like general understanding of smell and how we experience smell. But there is this whole other world, this whole other side to our sense of smell that most people aren't aware of, and what a incredible power it has over how we think, how we feel, what our motivations, our memories, and our behavior is. And so even though it's subconscious and we're not noticing it, every single breath that we take every day, we're getting information from the world around us, and it's influencing how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. So the kind of genesis of OVR was, given that smell is so powerful, how can we use it to make these digital experiences, whether it's VR, AR, XR, or just traditional digital experiences, how can we make them more powerful by introducing senses other than sight and sound? And we also asked ourselves that, yes, given that smell is powerful, can we use immersive technology like VR to actually amplify and focus the inherent value of scent on mood and behavior and emotion? So the way that we did that was by creating this technology platform and starting OVR based around that. This technology platform is the first ever scent technology that's spatial, personal, and wearable. So you can experience scent in virtual reality for the first time.
It's really cool. And it actually leads into the next slide that we had. How does olfactory influence our VR experience? And you talk about some of the general overview, but if you have some of the examples that you can talk about, and some of the what I understood is they can be used first responders use case. And if you could expand on some of that use cases, that would be really great.
There's a number of ways to look at the benefit of smell in these virtual experiences. And so the overarching theme is that no matter what the experience is, the addition of smell is going to make it more immersive. It's going to make it more emotional. It's going to make it more engaging. And then for most of them, it's going to make it more effective. Now, you can measure effective in a number of different ways, but just the addition of more senses is going to make these experiences better. And because scent is the only one of our senses directly connected to the limbic system in our brain, which is the memory and emotion center, it's obviously going to make these experiences a little bit more engaging, emotional, and immersive. We really focus on a few different categories of immersive experience that we like to support. Health and wellness being a big one, kind of arts and entertainment being a big one, and I think an obvious one. Social connection. How can we make our social interactions a little bit more engaging and emotional? And then kind of education, training, and simulation also. So if you look at an overview of the benefit of scent, you've got added immersion on one side of the Venn diagram, and then you've got the inherent value of scent on the other side of the Venn diagram. So for example, in immersive training scenario, field medics, right, for the Air Force or for the military, you can go through a training simulation to do something that's either too expensive, too dangerous, or too complex to do in real life. And by adding your sense of smell, not only are you more likely to commit that experience to memory, and so you kind of acquire those skills more effectively, but it's more realistic. So your eyes are engaged, your ears are engaged, and your nose is engaged. And because while visual and auditory memory actually degrade pretty quickly, scent memory is stable for a much longer period of time. We've all had these experiences while we're walking down the street or something happens, we catch a whiff of a smell, and instantly we're transported back to childhood or a core memory. Our sense of smell is really good at associating an emotional memory with a particular experience, object, or person, or time, or place, which is helpful for these training scenarios, but also in general. If you think about social interactions, wellness, the link to emotion and memory is really powerful. A couple other use case examples is we developed a immersive meditation program that we call Inhale. And you're in these beautiful nature scenarios, you have a guided meditation, and that meditation uses scent, not just to make it more realistic and immersive, but it helps guide your breath and your focus for these meditations. There's a number of hospitals, clinics, and detox and rehab facilities that are using this Inhale platform as a non-pharmacological intervention to help manage the effects of pain, stress, and anxiety. And so if you're feeling anxious or if you are perceiving pain, getting yourself into a VR headset and replacing the negative sensory input with positive sensory input, then you're able to manage the impact of that pain, stress, and anxiety quite a bit. In fact, we worked with the University of Vermont Medical Center on a study that they did for inpatient psychiatry, where they used olfactory virtual reality a few times a week for about 8 minutes. They took self-reported data from the participants right before, right after, and 3 hours after this experience. And the reported feelings of pain, stress, and anxiety right before the experience were a 9 out of 10. And immediately after the experience was a 3 out of 10. And what might be even more interesting is that 3 hours after the experience, they remained at a 3 out of 10. So we're not a medical device. We're not FDA anything. We're not treatment. But what this indicates to us is that when you combine scent and immersive technology, you can dramatically shift your mood and your psychological perception in ways that are beneficial to you if you're experiencing pain, stress, and anxiety. So we found that really interesting.
Yeah, compared
Yeah, that's
to
fascinating.
maybe like a typical like aromatherapy type of stuff where you just darken your room and maybe start a candle, how is it different in the VR experience versus maybe in reality I try to simulate the similar like maybe calm mindset?
It's a great question. It can get a little complex. I'll try not to get too nerdy right off the bat. But when you think about something like aromatherapy, which we are not, aromatherapy is based on the assumption that there's something inherent in these plants, the aroma of these plants, that has a physiological effect on you, a healing physiological effect. Now, without getting into the science of whether that may or may not be true, what we're focusing on is how our relationship to certain smells, either pre-existing ones or ones that are built in VR, affect us, affect our mood and affect us psychologically because of our relationship to those smells. Especially in the US, we think of lavender as a relaxing smell often. In fact, there's nothing inherently relaxing about lavender, right? When we are born, we have no relationship to smells. All our relationship to smells are learned. We don't like or dislike really any smell when we're babies. But over time, we learn subconsciously to have these relationships with smells. For example, my mother always used to put a lavender sachet under my pillow before bedtime. So I developed a relationship over time
Interesting.
that lavender means bedtime for me. What we can do with VR, which is really cool, is instead of waiting for that relationship to be built over a lifetime, we can create a virtual scenario that immediately and permanently links a particular smell to a particular mood or behavior. And so in this program, Inhale, for example, as you're meditating and getting to a calm state, you begin to associate that calm state with these certain smells. And so those smells in turn have that effect on you, either in VR or out of VR. So it's a compounding effect. And your brain, when it comes to smell, absolutely loves context and association. So if you just smell a smell without any sort of visual, auditory, or emotional context, it doesn't really have that big of effect on you. But if you have visual, audio context and you're emotionally engaged, then it has a really powerful effect. And we see this in positive, like the example I just explained, but also we see it in negative, where veterans, for example, who have suffered trauma during combat and have symptoms of PTS, post-traumatic stress, often the smells are one of the things that will trigger that emotional response the longest, even after therapy, which is also why SC, for example, is using virtual reality and smell together to help combat vets with PTSD manage those symptoms and go through kind of a rehabilitation program. So scent has this ability to genuinely affect your psychology, your state of mind, your mood, but only through your association with those scents. And so that's the main difference in how we approach scent for health and wellness or for training and simulation versus something like aromatherapy. A lot of this work that we've done too has also been in partnership with Dr. Rachel Hers, who is the leading olfactory neuroscientist in the country. She's our chief scientific advisor. She's kind of the authority on how smell affects your behavior and your psychology and your physiology. A lot of the ways we've developed the product, the hardware, software, scentware, has been using the research that we know about how scent works biologically and how it affects our psychology as well.
Very fascinating to hear that you can learn to associate with the new scent and also possibly unlearn negatively associated smell and then relearn and transform it into new association.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. I didn't think about the notion of lavender being society teaching you,
Like a
what's supposed to
cultural
be, yeah,
effect.
Yeah.
culture.
That's really interesting. I think when you start to add the layer that you mentioned, the spatial component, the proximity component to this, it becomes really fascinating. One of our first interviews we did, Aaron, was with a guy named Bruno Larval. He has a company called Larval, and he has been running his company in the metaverse for over a year. It's quite a lot of people that are basically jumping into, I think it's actually spatial is the metaverse environment, and then as well as meta workrooms. I think it's the two platforms he uses. And he basically says that there's some studies and stuff that are happening because of that. They're saying like, hey, is your brain being rewired because of you doing this, of being like
Mm.
completely immersed and doing this for your business? And he brought up like one of the biggest takeaways, which was proximity, and how with being more virtual in the last few years, given the circumstances, we've gone to 2D version, but we're losing the empathy and we're losing the trust and we're losing the caring. And then they add the layer of proximity to that. And what he's been finding is that proximity leads to empathy. So then I'm just imagining like when you add the layer of proximity, the spatial component to the scent technology and all of the research and all of the data that you just gave us there, just the layer of immersion and empathy that adds, I could see that being a huge factor in all that. Just really powerful.
It's a really good point. When you lose your sense of smell, it's called anosmia. A lot of people suffer that during COVID. And Brooke Jarvis wrote this really great article on it for the New York Times. It was earlier this year. And so she talks to a lot of people who've lost their sense of smell, and they describe what that's like as like living in black and white or behind a sheet of glass. And this idea that their sense of normalcy has disappeared with their sense of smell. They didn't really understand how powerful their smell was until it was gone. And I actually think that there is, to a degree, some of that happening in digital and in the metaverse, where we have this incredible connectivity, but it's only audio visual for the most part. And so to really bring a human element, a connectedness, and a proximity, you really want to engage your other senses, and smell being such a powerful emotional sense, that's really critical to have in there. And in fact, your sense of smell is fully formed and functioning even before you're born. 10 weeks old in the womb, your sense of smell is working. So you're already getting those connections. And
Mm.
then when you're born, you don't recognize your parents through how they sound or how they look right away. For the first few months, smell is how babies recognize their mother and vice versa. There's these kind of like big obvious things you can do with smell, but then there's the smaller things like how does smell affect how close we feel to each other and how connected we are to the world? There's a researcher, her name's Laura Berry. She's doing some really interesting research right now at Trinity College in Dublin. She's studying this phenomenon called psychological distance, which is used a lot in product marketing. Psychological distance is how close do you feel to someone or something. There's like the physical distance, like how physically distant, but also how emotionally close you feel. So she's using OVR right now to study how scent affects the phenomenon of psychological distance in the metaverse. The results will publish earlier next year, and I'm really interested to see how that works. And I just think it's one of the pieces to the puzzle when it comes to a really meaningful, effective metaverse in the future.
I completely agree with that. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I was even imagining it'll be funny if I could smell Johnny as I get closer in the metaverse avatar.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the things we're working on right now.
Oh,
Exactly
cool.
right, is having almost like a scent DNA. And this is if you wear a cologne or a perfume, I think that's like a little example of how you are socially signaling to other people you
Yeah.
want to smell a certain way. But
Yeah.
now with this technology, you can do that in the metaverse too, where you can program. We're working towards this isn't something you can do right now, but your scent DNA, the thing that you want to represent you from a scent standpoint in the metaverse, as interoperable too, something that you can carry with you from platform to platform, that you can share directly with friends and family or in these larger spaces. It's probably a good time to talk about how this thing actually works. But the same way that you can have digital assets in Warcraft or Second Life or Roblox or whatever, you can do the same thing with Scent using our software plugin. So basically, any digital asset you can tag as a Scent enabled asset. And so when someone else gets close to it, it's basically a collision system. So someone else gets close to it, it triggers the Scent. And we've designed it so as you get closer to an object, the intensity of the scent increases. So you can understand, you can orient yourself spatially in these digital environments using smell as well as sight and sound. Right now, we're pretty VR focused. I think because VR is so immersive, it's probably one of the most powerful ways to experience this. But we're working towards not just VR, but AR, mobile, desktop, tablet, etc. So you get the benefit of scent in all these different digital platforms.
Very fascinating. And we'll get to the exploration of combining multiple emerging technologies as well. And I want to get back to this slide actually, just so people understand how this all works together. Basically, there's the headset that I was wearing. It's by Pico, but virtually can be any headset device. And you'll be essentially wearing a scent device near your nose. And right now you're seeing, would you call it like an ink cartridge, almost like a scent cartridge? And
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's the scent cartridge that you're holding in your hand right there in the demo. You just pop it in.
yep, you just pop it in. It was pretty easy to pop in. The cartridge itself actually smelled really good for some reason.
And that's where the nanoparticles are coming out and are being released there. Okay.
You just put it with the band. I assume this is just more like a one way to put it on, and you'll have probably different ways that you're probably designing on how it attaches to different devices in the future, especially as the form of the VR headset changes. We're excited to see the Meta Quest Pro hopefully
Mhm.
announced next month and see how that transforms from the bulky big headset experience to maybe smaller. And as such, OVR might have to adapt to different ways of attaching wearing. Maybe there's attachment that you can buy.
We're launching our new form factor at CES in January, which, as you mentioned, the shape and size of the headsets is changing. It's getting smaller and smaller. The difference between AR and VR, that line is blurring, moving more towards the glasses. So our new form factor doesn't attach to the headset at all. You actually wear it almost like a microphone. So you can wear it
Interesting.
with any headset. It doesn't have to mount to the headset. You can wear it with any AR, VR headset, or you can also interface with mobile, desktop, or tablet too.
Mm.
So a little teaser there for CES this year.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. We will both be there this next year, so we'll make sure we stop by and capture some video of that as well. But that'll be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would be pretty exciting. I hope people get to actually try it in person. It's a really great demo that I had, and I want more people to try. You had 5 scenes pre-programmed inside the VR headset, and I had people just try it out. But outside of Fresh Consulting, which most of them are really impressed and never even used VR headset in the past, that was actually shocking to me because I was just introducing them as, oh, you can smell inside the VR. And they were like, oh, I never used VR in the past. Oh, then it'll be the most immersive experience in VR that you're going to have on the first try. But we're very curious, how has it been received? I'm pretty sure you guys had hundreds of people try already.
Thousands of people probably at this point have tried it. And I would say almost exclusively the responses are similar, like joy, delight. They've been really positive reactions. And that's not necessarily consistent with how they react to the idea of it before they try it. I think there's a lot of people who hear about Scent and VR, Scent and digital, and they're like, oh, totally. That's inevitable. Obviously, we would want that. And there's also a lot of people who are definitely not convinced, who are very skeptical of A, why it would matter, why it's important, and the quality of the experience that you can get when scent is spatial like this. But I would say almost everyone who tries it, as soon as they get in there, within a few seconds and they experience it, there's that aha moment where they go, oh, yeah, not only is this really cool, but this is the way it should be. And that's exactly what we're hoping for. And even the folks who tried it olfactory virtual reality before they've ever tried virtual reality, like trying color TV without starting in black and white, right? Like, yes, if you watch black and white TV, it does the trick in a certain way. You get the information, but why would you? It's so much better with color. And I think VR is so much better with scent. There's some interesting reactions too about the expectation of scent in these virtual environments that I think speaks a lot to the psychology of scent too, where when we first started the company, one of our primary goals when it comes to scent and scentware was how can we reproduce scents of the real world as accurately as possible in VR? And that's what we did for the first year or so of the company. I've been working in scent for a very long time. We use our sensory expertise. We use very fine-tuned, complex, like analytical lab equipment to analyze each scent molecule by molecule and rebuild them as accurately as possible, and then put them in these environments. What we found was that even when a scent is quote unquote accurate, as in we've measured it in real life, we've recreated it molecule for molecule in the lab, we know empirically that this is the same scent. When we put it in an environment and someone tries it, it doesn't resonate. They go, it's not quite right. So what we discovered is that there's the uncanny valley of scent. And by trying to recreate scents accurately, we're actually breaking immersion more often than we're creating it. And there's a few reasons for that. One, because scent is so subjective. If I tell you I've recreated the smell of the forest, each of you has a very particular memory formed in your head about what the forest smells like. I'm here in Burlington, Vermont. The forest outside my house smells a particular way on a particular day, a particular time of year. Might be very different in Seattle or Austin. So if I tell you it's forest, it sets an expectation in your brain of a very exact memory that only you have, that nobody else in the world does. So when you smell and it's not exactly that, it actually sends off a red flag in your brain that something might be wrong. My expectation and the reality don't match. That's a problem. But that happens in VR in general too. If the physics don't line up, if the visuals aren't very good, it doesn't meet your expectations, it's not a very positive or effective experience. Same thing with scent. So what we realized was that instead of trying to recreate the real world and just port it over into digital, which is interesting. And in certain cases, it's still what we want to do. It's actually definitely not the most interesting thing you can do with it, though, right? If we're just repeating what's out there in VR, I don't know, where's the fun in that? The whole point of VR is that anything is possible, right? Anything's possible in the metaverse. And so the metaverse needs and VR needs is not smells that we're used to, that we can check a box and go, yes, that's accurate. What it needs is an entirely new alphabet of scents. Now, in the real world, we can experience trillions of different smells, literally trillions of different smells. We might not need to create a trillion smells in the metaverse, but if we can create a few hundred or a few thousand options, then we can essentially recreate the variety of smells that we experience in the real world in the metaverse, in VR, and form new associations and new memories that are digitally native. And that's what's most exciting for me, because that has the most potential and it's limitless. That's what we've done and what we're working on is in our scent cartridge, which has 9 primary odors, we've identified what are the 9 odors. Yes, perfect. What are the 9 categories that you can combine, not to create as many realistic scents as possible, but just the most variety, period. Like a cool analogy for this is flavors, right? I'm going to call them artificial flavors. There's going to be a lot of reaction to that term artificial. Put that word aside for a minute. The point of the story is that in 1850, there was no such thing as artificial flavor. You got what nature gave you. Nature gave you all kinds of amazing things. Then in the early 1950s, some scientists discovered a few artificial flavors. They discovered cherry, banana, grape, and apple, I think. And they exhibited them in some kind of World's Fair, and they put them in hard candies. And people tried these hard candies, and they were like, ooh, apple hard candy. It didn't really taste like apple, but it was delicious. And so they said, oh, I love this. And from that point on, there was a split. We were able to imitate or recreate nature in a certain way, but really we have this whole new palette. And you fast forward to today, flavors are in everything, whether they're listed in the ingredient panel or not. Flavors are in everything. They define the food and the drink that we consume, and we love them. And there's very conceptual flavors, and there's very realistic seeming flavors, but there's this whole new alphabet, this whole new way to create flavor experiences where we're no longer just constrained to nature. And that's what we're working on creating for the metaverse. That might have been a little bit rambling, but it's such an important distinction. And it's something that I'm so excited about is the future of digital is not just a replica of the real world. It's only limited by your imagination. And because we can do that with sounds and sights, now we can do that with smells also.
I was actually imagining the situation for food coloring, where if you, let's say, create ice cream of avocado or the ube yum, maybe in reality the color comes out very faint, but we like to see a strong color of purple, the strong color of green, to feel like, yes, I'm eating that flavor of ice cream, even if it's like artificially done.
Yeah,
So
there's some science to it and there's some art to getting the right multisensory experience, the right visuals, the right physics, the right audio, the right smell, the right kind of, all these pieces get combined together. And when they're done, you have a remarkable experience. There's nothing quite like it. If they're done wrong, it might not be so compelling.
That's true. That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
I really like what you were saying about the ABC of sense as well, like being able to say, "Hey, these are the 1,000," and the points around, like, the uncanny valley aspect. We've covered that a lot with actually avatars and thinking about that and how what we look like and personal identity and how you wanna represent yourself. But anyways, you think about sense, it's true. There's an element there. It's a net new experience. It might be a new smell, but that might generally get you to that smell and be like, "This is the smell of blank," right? This is how roses smell, but it wouldn't be exactly like what you would think as the individual creating the scent. May be very different from what you smell or what Elisha smells. I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you.
yeah, we can get a little bit more technical than maybe on the other shows. One of the questions that some of us had as we were experiencing the VR headset is, can you mix two scents to produce one? And this might be somewhat obvious question for some people, but as you think deeply about it, it might be more challenging than it seems. For example, there may be a bacon smell that maybe this cartridge can already produce. And then maybe there is the egg smell that you can produce. But if you combine them together, do they actually smell like bacon and egg together? Or would there be some challenges in combining some smells? I'm thinking when I combine the color palettes, if you just combine without thinking, it just become like a black color in the end. It just gets
Mhm.
mushed over and it doesn't blend as you might think.
So the answer, although it's not a very satisfactory answer, is maybe and sometimes. So there's a few ways to look at this. Unfortunately, when it comes to smell, one plus one rarely equals two. Now, there is some predictability, and there's actually some really interesting research going on right now, including Alex Wilchko at Google, trying to understand by the shape of the molecule how they might combine to create a sensory perception. But because of the antagonist effect of smell molecules, if it was literally eggs and bacon and you combine them, it would smell like bacon and eggs. Like that one we already know. But what happens often is that when you combine two that you think you would be able to predict what the result is, you get something completely different. But you combine cotton candy and peanuts, you think you get sweet candy peanuts, but you get fish. And that's like a strange sounding example, but there are instances where you get these very peculiar off odors. So that's one piece of the question. Is there a predictable way to combine things to create new things? And once again, it's very hard using a model, like a theoretical model, to predict the sensory outcome of combining two molecules or groups of molecule scented molecules. The other part of the question is there an RGB or CMYK of scent, right? Are there base smells or molecules that are able to produce all of the combinations that we smell? And the answer there is no. So unlike light, where we can do RGB or CMYK and produce millions of colors, there are so many different odor molecules that look and behave differently and fall into different sensory categories that they can combine in a trillion different ways that there's no kind of RGB. Each human has about 400 different types of olfactory receptors, the kind of lock and key style things in the nose, that those scent molecules, when we breathe in, they latch on in different combinations, then we get a sensory perception, and we associate that sensory perception with a certain feeling or person or experience. So unfortunately, there's no RGB or CMYK. We can, to some degree, infer what different combinations will produce, and we have a lot of information from research, fragrance companies, flavor companies about what has worked and what hasn't, but there's always an X factor in what you're going to perceive. And then there's even a Y factor. You might have a different perception of that new smell combination than me because of previous associations you have with components of it. So I'm not sure that completely answered the question or the spirit of the question, but the way that we approach it is we know that there's going to be unpredictable outcomes, but can we select 9 base compounds where we know that whatever those outcomes are, they fall on the right side of 3 axes? One is positive valence. Can we, with good degree of certainty, know that you're not going to accidentally create something disgusting? And we're able to say, yeah, it's probably going to fall in this category. So positive valence. The second is some degree of familiarity. If we create something so novel that you've got zero perception of how to even categorize it, you might not even be able to smell it, which is a weird thing to say, but there's examples of certain molecules that don't fit into any category, and some people literally can't perceive them. So we need some degree of familiarity. And then the third axis is arousal. Is it arousing or is it sedating? And we look at those kind of 3 axes. And so we know that if we start with these 9 compounds, no matter what gets created or what you create, they're going to fall in the area that we want them to, even if we can't predict what that smell will be from that combination.
Interesting. I'm imagining the musical scale where if it's the scale of a G major, no matter what sound you play within the scale, it's kind of go well, but you know that if you introduce flats or sharps out of scale sound, it can sound like, whoa, that's a weird sound. I don't want to hear this weird musical note. Is it similar?
Oh, that's a
That
great way to put it. And in fact, music is a really good analogy to smell in many ways. Actually, even the language that we use when describing scents, we use note and accord, and we use a lot of the same language. So combining different scent notes, and a scent note might be green or floral or musky or something like that. We combine those notes to create an accord or a finished smell. Using our platform, you can create a single smell where you get one impact, or over time. You can create a smell that kind of transforms over time, the same way that you can create a musical track. And even using the language around smell or the language around sound to describe how smell plays a role in digital experiences is great, right? Sound plays 2 roles. If you're watching a movie, for example, sound effects give realism and immersion to the movie. Soundtrack provides mood and emotion and tension and all those kind of intangible things. And you can use smell in exactly the same way in a virtual environment to give a degree of realism and context, but also to provide mood and emotion.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Some of the examples, Elisha, you showed, I think it was a fire and then marshmallows. And I think that when you showed the example of the bacon and the eggs and like, oh, can those be combined? It's interesting that what was probably actually happening was you were actually only introducing a single smell with the technology, fire or something. But the fact that maybe in his mind, he remembers the smell of fire and marshmallows. So he might have gotten a hint of the marshmallow even though it wasn't there. And so it's because of the memory might be associated that way. Because he's, oh, and it smells like a little bit like sweet or something that you said that was interesting because you mentioned 2 smells and in reality it might have just been one. And so there is power in like how you do that when you said you add a note of this and a note of that to provide something that might introduce something that's actually not there.
That's another great example. And it goes back to the uncanny valley, right? The same way that your brain is pretty good at filling in visual information in the gaps, your brain can also, to a certain degree, fill in perceptual information, right? So instead of trying to make exactly the right smell, we give you a direction, and then your brain creates an association that kind of fills in that last 5, 10, 20%. We did this interesting experiment too, where we created the smell, generic citrus smell. We combined like a lemon and an orange and a lime, very generic citrus. And then in a virtual environment, we gave someone a lemon and orange, these different virtual assets with the same smell. This is a very informal thing that we did, but we asked people to describe the accuracy, and it was identical across all of them. So your brain smelled citrusy, it saw a lemon, and it said spot on. Same thing with an orange, same thing with a lime, same thing with all these things. So what that proved to us is that You give your brain a little nudge in the right direction, and it fills in the rest of the information.
I think what was really fascinating for me in the demo is the smell of the campfire when I
Mm.
smelled like a barbecue, like a smoky smell, because I'm so used to smelling something more like generally pleasing, right? Like a lavender. Oh, it's supposed to be good and relaxing. I never smell something like a campfire where it's like, oh, it's just smoky smell. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily meant to make me feel in an artificial way positive for aromatherapy. It's, oh wow, that's really interesting smell. And I want to ask this question of, can you simulate chemical reactions? So for example, we talked about bacon and egg. There are different kind of food. It could be a steak, like you can grill the steak, but you can also maybe bake the steak. Maybe you don't want to boil the steak, but you could boil the steak and maybe cook it in different ways. Could OVR technology, or even at least in theory, could you simulate chemical reaction and say add steak and fire, like add steak and grill, add steak and the apple chip would smell slightly similar but a little bit different question than the earlier example of just two independent objects. In this case, it's an object or food and a chemical reaction combined.
Yeah, so I think I understand what you're asking, and the answer is yes. And actually, Sarah, our head of Scentware, is working on some research around this too. And once again, like a lot of this, there's a couple different ways to look at it. A raw piece of meat versus a grilled steak, right? The smell is an indicator of certain chemical reactions. In the case of the steak, the Maillard reaction, which uses protein and sugars to create that kind of caramelic effect. Cooking is chemistry. So, what are the different kind of smells that indicate changes in the state of matter, right? Protein coagulation, caramelization, burnt, fermentation. So, you can classify these modifiers to add to particular base or aromas. You still can look at a raw steak and a grilled steak as two completely different entities. Or you can have these modifying smells that work to alter your perception of the base smell in a way that gives you the impression of a different matter state altogether. And that doesn't just apply to food, right? This is something that's been in the perfume industry for a very long time. You come up with a base smell, like a base fragrance. And then let's say you want to add sensuality, or you want to add freshness, or you want to add liveliness or comfort. It's not just about chemical reactions, it's about the change states, if that's the right word. It can be very physical, like grilling a steak, or it can be a little bit more emotional, like sensuality or comfort. And by adding those modifiers in the right proportion, you get a new impression that's reminiscent of the old, and you can present it as its own discrete thing. Or using VR, you can tell the story of that change. And like you said, there's some similarities to this question and the previous one, but this is more about, are there modification smells that tell the story of changing the state of matter? And the answer is yes.
Fascinating. Yeah, I was very curious about those questions because people like us who are like engineers ourselves and write software piece, build VR experience, when this OVR have this SDK where, hey, you can program the experience that you want your customers to experience. We were very interested
Mhm.
in the RGB, and I know you said that's difficult, but maybe using the nine base scent combination, how can we be guided to create a chord of, oh, let's
Mhm.
have people experience like picking up a meat and grill it on the barbecue, and without being the scent expert, we have
Mhm.
a guide on how to go about creating the experience. Maybe there's like a guide that
Mm.
we still have to read and understand, but as
Mhm.
external person who doesn't have all the knowledge that you guys have in house, how do we help produce those smells? So that's why we're very
Uh,
interested in.
yeah, awesome question. And so just to frame it, the plugin that we have for you, if you're building a project in Unity or Unreal, allows you to essentially tag assets as scent enable. And we've structured the plugin to be as user friendly as possible. So it behaves a lot like spatial audio. You've got an object, you've got a listener, and you basically apply an invisible geometry to this virtual asset. And as the user collides with the exterior of that geometry, it begins to trigger scent. The closer you get to the interior of the geometry, the more intense the scent is. And then when you either move yourself or the geometry away, you stop smelling. So that's like the physics of it. Now, what you're talking about is how do you select the right scent, combination of scents, or the right sequence of scents over time. For one, we would love to help you or anyone else and guide you through that process. And also, the reality is, you're learning, and so are we. We actually don't necessarily have all the answers. A lot of it is going to be trial and error, especially because of the unpredictability of scent, where we go, what is the right scent for this moment or this asset or this environment? And so I think a lot of it is trial and error. And just like an audio engineer or a musician who's engineering a soundtrack, you're actually learning to play an instrument in a certain way. So it's not the best answer for really engineering minded people to say, hey, there's not an if then statement for everything. There's a lot of kind of artistry in trying to create the right smell at the right moment. But I'd say we love having this conversation with developers and with engineers about a really small detail. And because even little things like the geometry that you put around the rows that you experience, for example, we played with the size and shape of that geometry quite a bit before we felt that the interaction was authentic. At first, it took too long for the scent to impact to hit you. But if the geometry is too big, then you don't really associate the smell with the object. There's a creativity and a play involved in getting just the right thing. And the more
Mm.
you mess around with it and the more you discover, the more we learn from you also.
From an engineering standpoint of saying, oh, there's actually an opportunity to help contribute and help write the guidelines and create the best practices around how you engineer and proximity based on the types of scents and things like that. How does that feedback loop, or how would it look for developers? Would they be reaching out to you by email? Do you guys have a Discord or Slack channel? Like, how do you guys get that feedback from engineers, or how would you gather that?
Discord primarily. You can definitely reach out to us via email as well, but we mostly communicate with the developers via Discord. My co-founder and CTO, Matt, this is one of the things that he has spent a lot of focus on, is trying to understand and, to the best that we can, structure and categorize that feedback in a way that we can then make the developer tools a little bit more intuitive, create some standards at the standard setting level around how to use this, while still leaving lots of room for discovery and creativity. Anyone who is working on a project with us, whether it's for health and wellness or for marketing or entertainment, knows that we're pretty heavily involved on the Discord channel. And so we've got a lot of documentation about how to use it and best practices, but that feedback loop where we'll capture feedback and sometimes make adjustments in real time, but capture it all and then continually release new features and functionality and bug fixes and improvements.
Yeah, that's really great for engineers to have such community that we can join and learn and exchange ideas. And speaking of creativity, I want to spend last bit of our time talking about how your technology could work along or together with the other technologies. And earlier, I know we mentioned the mobile and PCs and metaverse. And maybe I'll start and you guys can jump in and maybe have
Mhm.
some thoughts together. This is just like a brainstorming on live. So, for example, AR is a natural maybe branching or segment from the VR experience. We talked about the AR and VR even combined together as the MR in the latest headset that's probably coming up soon. And in AR, I was imagining, what if you can have, let's say, like a card that's printed with a symbol, like a tracker, and the tracker generates the visual of a rose, so I can like place it anywhere on my desk. And then as I get close to the tracker, I can actually smell the rose. That's just one of the ways that you can possibly combine with the other technologies. And feel free to jump in. We talked about metaverse and having a scent smell. Like I can smell Johnny. Maybe I can get close and like, oh yeah, I smell Johnny here.
You talked about the scent DNA and individuals having DNA. I think about some of the environments we've been a part of, some of the metaverse environments that we've been testing and experimenting with, and how that hasn't really crossed my mind. But then I think about walking into a store has a scent sometimes, or walking into my grandparents' house. I know that sounds weird, but
Mm.
there is a way to create memories and things like that. There's a few different environments out there, but it could be interesting to see that in something like Meta Horizon World, where you're building a world, but then you can actually have scent be a part of the location, like the room, or even your NFTs, right? Like as you get approaching it,
Mm.
pairing an NFT with a scent, and then there's a DNA to that. Could be really interesting.
These ideas are perfect. They're amazing. It's some of it we've thought about before, some of it's new, which is even better. That AR functionality that you talked about, Elijah, that's definitely one of the things that we're like really excited about. Having a tracker and being able to have the rose, I think is a great example. To be able to superimpose something beautiful like a rose on an inanimate object. Can you imagine just walking down the street and every single fire hydrant, trash can, whatever that is just has to be there but isn't necessarily part of the beautiful design? You have an augmented layer over that. So when you walk by it, you get good smells, more interesting smells, or you can
Interesting.
interact with it. And the same thing with people. Right now, if we were to wear a fragrance in the real world, we would be emitting fragrance molecules to your nose and you would smell it if you walk by us. If you reverse that, where you're emitting a digital signal when someone walks by you, their wearable triggers that smell. It's digital perfume. I'll tease a little bit more about CES. One of the cool things that we're releasing in the consumer product next year is a creator tool. So all of these tools, not just for VR creators anymore, but anyone can have the digital scent creation tool to create these moments or sequences and share them with each other, and even become a digital perfumer if you wanted to, and be able to send to friends or post in a marketplace. And so there's all of these kind of augmented and metaverse applications that we see potential for in the future. And I get really excited about that.
Yeah, we would love to get our hands on it once that
Yeah.
comes out. Even in the beta form, we would love to try it out and give feedback. Earlier, we talked about the digital scent, and I thought that's a perfect use case for Web3. If I could commit my DNA, right, unique DNA into Web3, and maybe a little bit weird, but that could be turned into some kind of like a token, right? Like NFT, and like, oh, I can give you my scent DNA. And maybe it's weird if it's attached to me. Maybe it makes sense for some other use case. Maybe it's not a human based scent DNA, but there are some interesting use case where you can tokenize some data like that and exchange.
Yeah,
No, I
no.
think that's a great one. I definitely do not claim to have this all figured out, but we have talked about DNA and tokenizing it and how that may or may not relate to NFT, and even the privacy and data rights around
Mhm, mhm.
smell is something that we've talked about since day one, but we don't have all of it figured out yet. But it's something that certainly needs to be addressed at each of these stages.
Yeah, it might be interesting to have a history of my scent DNA probably changes like as I age, if I'm capturing it as I age or as I'm placing myself in different environments or decide to represent myself differently in the smell and having a history of a change. That is interesting. And you already mentioned about mobile and PC. Could you expand on that a little bit? How you're trying to support that outside of the VR headset?
Yep, the form factor itself is changing a little bit. The base technology is the same, but the form factor is changing a little bit to make it wearable with any sort of digital interface or consumption layer. So you'll be able to experience digital content, Web3, Metaverse, AR, XR, with the same piece of technology. There's really two changes. One, there is a form factor change with some optimizations and product improvements, actually, that Fresh is assisting us with. And by the way, we're in the business of moving molecules here. So the fluid dynamics, the electronics, this is like really complicated. So thank you for being part of our development process and our creative brainstorm sessions and actually taking this into reality. So the form factor and the hardware components are reorganizing and being optimized a little bit. And then our software compatibility is expanding a little bit. So we're going to be launching a mobile app that allows more people to access AR and XR functionality on their phones as well as VR headsets. We believe that although VR is probably the most immersive and maybe the most compelling way to experience it, it is just a part of the metaverse and Web3. And we really believe and want scent to not live in one corner of it, but to be able to be experienced by as many people as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're gonna be closing here very soon. I would love to see AI and ML playing maybe in the future of generating the smell that human didn't think of, but maybe the AI can figure something out. So the last question that I want to ask, Aaron, is what's next for you? You already talked about
Oh,
coming to CES and other exciting things I assume happening soon.
yeah, we've touched on some of it for sure. What's really capturing my attention and my excitement is CES in 2023. Some of the new things that we'll be able to do with technology in 2023 And at least as exciting is who we'll be able to partner with in 2023 too. So right now, OVR is its own ecosystem. I'm looking forward to partnering with more developers, more creative people in general, game and entertainment studios, more brands, more health and wellness, and more researchers. And so really expanding our partnership network and being able to hand this tool over to all these creative people and seeing what they can create or what we can create together on our new platform.
Yeah, and I've listed some of the social media presence that you guys have. What's the best way to reach out to you and learn more about how they can engage in partnership with you?
I would say the best way is through our website, the contact page on our website, info@ovrtechnology.com. But feel free to reach out on any of these social platforms as well, especially Twitter or LinkedIn. But whoever it is who's listening out there, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's interesting to you, and we'd love to partner with you, whether you're a creator or whether you're a giant brand or company too.
Yeah, Aaron, thank you
Great.
so
Mm.
much. And we learned so much from you. And we're excited to see you at CES 2023.
It was a real pleasure getting to speak with you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and seeing you at CES.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.